Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, June 21st, 2023. Former Special Counsel John Durham, who investigated the FBI's investigation of possible ties between Russia and the Donald Trump 2016 presidential campaign, testifies before the House Judiciary Committee. Associated Press writes that he found himself at the center of a heated political fight, with Democrats denouncing his inquiry and Republicans arguing that its findings proved an anti-Trump bias within law enforcement. Just ahead, some of today's hearing, and we talk about it with Sabrina Eaton, Washington correspondent for Cleveland.com and The Plain Dealer. Two presidential veto override votes in Congress today, one on a bill that would disapprove the EPA's stricter emissions standard for heavy-duty trucks, the other on a bill to block President Joe Biden's college student loan forgiveness plan. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell tells the House Financial Services Committee that it will take more time to bring inflation down to its 2% target, and more interest rate increases are likely this year. Senate Judiciary Committee holds a hearing on transgender rights. Congress unveils a postage stamp to honor the late Congressman and civil rights leader John Lewis. And a State Department spokesman asked about President Biden's calling Chinese President Xi Jinping a dictator. And we begin with former Special Counsel John Durham testifying before the House Judiciary Committee about his recent report criticizing the FBI for its investigation into the 2016 Trump presidential campaign and possible ties to Russia. This is how NBC News reports it. John Durham last month released a 300-page report after completing his 4-year investigation into the Trump-Russia probe. He criticized the FBI at length in the report, accusing the agency of acting negligently by opening the investigation based on vague and insufficient information, but did not provide any new evidence that anyone in the government had acted unlawfully. That from NBC News. And here's part of today's hearing. Congressman Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, questioning John Durham.
You wrote in your report, quote, based on the evidence gathered in the multiple exhaustive and costly federal investigations of these matters, including the instant investigation, neither U.S. law enforcement nor the intelligence community appears to have possessed any actual evidence of collusion in their holdings at the commencement of the Crossfire investigation. To date, has any evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia ever been uncovered?
I mean, there is information, obviously, in the report that was prepared by Director Mueller and whatnot. But as to collusion or conspiracy, I'm not aware of any.
And let me stop you. When the FBI opened Crossfire Hurricane, that's the issue at hand, it did not have any information that anyone in the Trump campaign had ever been in contact with Russian intelligence officials. Isn't that right?
As we wrote in the report, we talked to the director of the CIA, the deputy director of the CIA, the director of NSA, and people within the FBI, and there was no such information that they had in their holdings at the time they opened Crossfire Hurricane.
And you detail, I'm going to go quickly here, I run out of time. You detail how FBI personnel working on FISA applications violated protocols. They were cavalier at best, as you said in your own words, towards accuracy and completeness. Senior FBI personnel displayed a serious lack of analytical rigor towards information that they received, especially information received from politically affiliated persons or entities. And you said, quote, a significant reliance on investigative leads provided or funded by Trump's political opponents were relied upon here. Among the most alarming things that you referred to in the report is the impact of confirmation bias. And you said in your report at page 303, that's defined as, or it stands for, the general proposition that there is a common human tendency, mostly unintentional, for people to accept information and evidence that is consistent with what they believe to be true. But sir, here, this wasn't innocent, unintentional human tendency, was it? It was overt political bias, was it not? Peter Strzok, for example.
There are some individuals who clearly expressed a personal bias. It's difficult to get into somebody else's head to see whether they knew it.
Unless we have their emails, right? And Peter Strzok, for example, he had pronounced hostile feelings towards President Trump. Everybody knows that. Everybody in the country knows it. So he was in charge of this. He was the Deputy Assistant Director of Counterintelligence, officially opened the investigation at the direction of Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe. He said horrible things about President Trump and all of his supporters, by the way. How could we say he did not have political bias?
Yeah, I know that it clearly reflects a personal bias that he had. I'll leave it to others and the facts that are set out in the in the report as to whether that's political bias, personal bias, but there's clearly bias.
What we know now is the FBI and the DOJ have been turned into activated political weapons against citizens and even a former president because of their opposing viewpoints, sir. They failed to follow protocols in 2016, and you've suggested new protocols may somehow be affixed to this. How can the American people have confidence that if they didn't follow protocols in 2016, that they will new protocols?
And I think that's why I said that in the opening remarks, this is not an easy fix. I mean, it's going to take time to rebuild the public's confidence in the institution. The changes of the reforms they have made are certainly changes that are going to guard to some extent against the repeat of what happened in Crossfire Hurricane.
Former Special Counsel John Durham at today's House Judiciary Committee hearing. The questions from Congressman Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana. Congressman Steve Cohen, Democrat from Tennessee, in his questioning, said that John Durham's investigation was set up to hurt the investigation of former Special Counsel Robert Mueller into ties between the 2016 Trump presidential campaign and Russia.
The meeting at Trump Tower between the Russians and the Trump boys, where they talked about allegedly adoptions, but we know it was really about sanctions. How was that outside of your report?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow that.
Meeting at the Trump Tower, Russian attorney came to the Trump, and Donald Trump Jr. was just wonderful, wonderful. We love it, we love it. Russian decisions to interact with the Trump campaign and influence the actions of the campaign, allegedly for adoption law, but really for sanctions relief. The FBI came up with that, did they not?
A meeting took place at Trump Towers on June 9th. The lure, as I understand it, was that there was derogatory information on Clinton that was going to be provided. They met, and as I believe in a HPSI report, the HPSI report fully laid that out, that the discussion then at Trump Towers was about adoption, not about anything relating to Mrs. Clinton.
It was totally about sanctions. You're trying to get rid of the Magnitsky Law. Adoptions is a ruse. Should you not have gone and looked into that and seen what the Russians were wanting in return for that? Because that's the biggest thing Putin wanted at the time, was to get Trump to relieve his people of Magnitsky sanctions.
I think that Director Mueller investigated that, and I believe one of your House committees explored that. That was outside the scope of what we were looking at.
And it was outside the scope of your authority to look at Klimnik and Manafort meeting and exchanging polling data?
Was that out? I'm sorry, I'm not following your question.
Manafort. You remember Manafort, the crook that managed the campaign for nothing but got tons of money from different Russian people over the years? That y'all pardoned, Mr. Barr later helped him with a commutation or a pardon, I think a pardon. Manafort.
I know who Mr. Manafort is.
Yeah, he met with Klimnik, and they discussed polling data. You don't know about that?
No, that Mr. Klimnik met with a lot of people, including people.
He met with Manafort and discussed polling data. Do you not know about that?
I'm aware of that.
All right. Why did you then not think it was a good idea for you to look into it and see if the FBI wasn't correct in that there was collusion, a connection between Russia and the Trump campaign to elect Trump?
My assignment was to look at the conduct of the intelligence community agencies, not to conduct some separate investigation that was done by the House or that's done by the Senate or was done by Director Mueller.
You don't think that if the intelligence communities, the FBI, others came up with this information and did good work, that should be part of your balanced report?
Yeah, well, I'm not following your question. I apologize.
Well, I've tried to follow your report. Mr. Donald Trump Jr. would have called it a nothing burger. Mm-hmm. You got no convictions. You got nothing. It was all set up to hurt the Mueller report, which was correct and was redacted, to hurt the Bidens, and to help Trump. And you were a part of it.
Exchange between Congressman Steve Cohen, Democrat from Tennessee, and former Special Counsel John Durham at today's House Judiciary Committee hearing. Sabrina Eaton, Washington correspondent for Cleveland.com and The Plain Dealer, has been covering the John Durham testimony, joining us now by phone. Thank you for being on Washington Today. The headline of your article asks the question about the Durham report, bombshell or dud. Was that question answered today, or does it depend upon which political party you're in?
Well, I'd say it's the latter because, clearly, as Congressman Cohen said, they think that it was a nothing burger, whereas Congressman Jim Jordan, who is from Ohio, which is why I pay attention to his committee, seemed to think that it was really hot stuff and that it showed, all kinds of FBI misdeeds, and it indicated that it kind of fed into his theory that the government is being weaponized against Donald Trump and the citizens of the country, particularly the FBI.
John Durham met with the House Intelligence Committee Tuesday night, and the chair and ranking member spoke to reporters, and they sounded like it was a good meeting and that they plan to implement reforms suggested by John Durham, but there was a very different tone today.
I think different committees have different ways of operating. A lot of the stuff at the Select Intelligence, well, I kind of pay attention to that one too because, Mike Turner, who's the chair of that one, is also an Ohio guy. The two committees seem to have very different ways of operating these days. The Judiciary Committee seems like it is more of a, has more of a world wrestling kind of a thing going on between Republicans and Democrats, trying to snipe at each other in a very public forum. I think that a lot of what the Select Intelligence Committee does is behind closed doors. So if they were inclined to do that, it's not something that you would necessarily see. And I think that Chairman Turner really tries to do a lot more of the bipartisan thing than Chairman Jordan, because Chairman Jordan is way more into the whole, partisan fighting thing than Congressman Turner is.
Former Special Counsel John Durham has made a couple of dozen suggested reforms at the FBI. Did we learn today if any of those have been implemented and if Congress needs to get involved for further reform?
Well, I think that, he has – I'm not a big expert on the FBI and its policies, but, my impression from listening to what was going on is that some of them were implemented. I think that, some of what Mr. Durham was suggesting included having a person within the FBI whose job is to be more or less the devil's advocate on these things and argue harder against, why should we be doing these things and is it proper versus just kind of allowing investigations to proceed unchecked. Congressman Jordan, who, is obviously the chairman of a committee, he wants to use the congressional spending process to limit how the Justice Department spends tax dollars. He and I believe Congressman Turner have also called for this, changes in how the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act operates, and that allows law enforcement to conduct electronic surveillance of people. And I think that they seem to believe that it's too easy for the FBI and other entities to do that, and it needs to be reined in.
We're talking with Sabrina Eaton from Cleveland.com and The Plain Dealer. It was a multi-hour hearing today. What other exchanges between the members and the witness caught your eye?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, there's just always a lot going on. I know that some people have reported on exchanges between Texas Representative Sheila Jackson Lee and Congressman Jordan, because I guess he seemed to feel that her line of questioning was not fruitful. And there's just all kinds of sniping that goes on back and forth here. There was another one where one of the Republican congressmen, I think it was Congressman Niels, was taking shots at Eric Swalwell, a congressman from California, and then one of the congressmen from Maryland wanted to have his words removed, and it was, there's just always stuff like that going on at these judiciary hearings. I mean, if it doesn't happen at a judiciary hearing, it seems like it's more newsworthy than if it does happen, just because it seems like it's just so common at in that committee.
You mentioned you cover the chairman quite closely, Jim Jordan, Republican from Ohio. How is this issue playing back home?
I think it depends on again, on your partisan leanings. I think that, Congressman Jordan is extremely popular in his district, which was drawn to be very strongly Republican. And there's a lot of people that regard him as like a big, warrior for the conservative cause, and they're very keen on him. And then there's a lot of people who think he's an idiot, More of the Democrats. He's a rather polarizing figure. I mean, he's somebody that people either really like or really can't stand.
Sabrina Eaton, Washington correspondent with The Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com. That's where you can find her stories. And also on Twitter at Sabrina Eaton. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me. Have a good day.
The U.S. House today bringing up a resolution to censure Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, former chair of the House Intelligence Committee, for, the resolution says, promoting false allegations of ties between the 2016 Trump presidential campaign and the Russian government. A Democratic motion to table or kill the resolution failed by a vote of 208 to 218 along party lines. A similar resolution to censure Congressman Schiff was tabled last week, with 20 Republicans joining the Democrats in voting to kill it. They switched their votes on this new resolution. One difference between the resolutions is the one that failed would have issued a fine against Congressman Schiff of $16 million if the Ethics Committee found that he did lie. The sponsor of both resolutions and debating the one today on the floor, Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, Republican from Florida.
As chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff launched an all-out political campaign built on baseless distortions against a sitting U.S. president at the expense of every single citizen in this country and the honor of the House of Representatives. With access to sensitive information unavailable to most members of Congress and certainly not accessible to the American people, Schiff abused his privileges claiming to know the truth, while leaving Americans in the dark about this web of lies. Lies so severe that they altered the course of the country forever. The lie that
Gentlelady will suspend. The House is not in order. Members, please take your conversations off the floor.
The lie that President Donald Trump colluded with Russia to steal the 2016 presidential election, revealed to be completely false by numerous investigations, including the Durham report. The lie that the Steele dossier, a folder of falsified and since completely debunked collusions, accusations funded by the Democrat Party, had any shred of credibility. Yet Schiff read it into congressional record as fact. Lies concocted and compiled in a false memo that was used to lie to the FISA court to precipitate domestic spying on U.S. citizen Carter Page, violating American civil liberties. Not only was this egregious abuse of Schiff's privileged access to classified information, but this memo was littered with 17 major mistakes and omissions. The groundless memo violated Carter Page's civil liberties, publicly assassinated his character, and subjected him to multiple abusive, unlawful investigations.
Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, Republican from Florida, sponsor of this resolution to censure Congressman Adam Schiff, speaking on the House floor. Congressman Schiff, Democrat from California, later responded.
Donald Trump is under indictment for actions that jeopardize our national security, and McCarthy would spend the nation's time on petty political payback, thinking he can censure or fine Trump's opposition into submission. But I will not yield, not 1 inch. The cost to the Speaker's delinquency is high, but the cost to Congress of this frivolous and yet dangerous resolution may be even higher, as it represents another serious abuse of power. Donald Trump has threatened that any of you that defy him and vote against this partisan resolution will be met by a primary challenge. And he calls for my imprisonment. If a transient majority can punish and attempt to silence members who hold a corrupt president to account, there is no telling what further corruption of office will follow. And I say this to Speaker McCarthy and others who wish to gratify Donald Trump with this act of subservience or bend to his demands. Try as you might to expel me from Congress or silence me with a $16 million fine, you will not succeed. You might as well make it $160 million. You will never deter me from doing my duty.
Congressman Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, on the House floor. He is the 25th U.S. House member in U.S. history to be censured by the House. Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, Republican from Colorado, has introduced a privileged resolution calling for President Biden to be impeached over his handling of immigration and border security. A House vote related to that resolution, likely a motion to table or kill it, is expected this week. Attorney General Merrick Garland is responding to the accusations from Republicans that the Justice Department is biased because there are pending investigations or indictments against Republicans, including former President Donald Trump, which could carry jail time. And at the same time, there was a plea deal offered to Hunter Biden, son of President Joe Biden, yesterday to settle federal charges that he evaded taxes and illegally bought a gun, a plea that will likely not include a prison sentence. Here is the Attorney General.
Do these cases reflect a different standard of justice depending on political leanings?
So, as I said from the moment of my appointment as Attorney General, I would leave this matter in the hands of the United States Attorney, who was appointed by the previous president and assigned to this matter by the previous administration, that he would be given full authority to decide the matter as he decided was appropriate. That's what he's done. And if you have any further questions about that matter, you should direct them to the U.S. Attorney to explain his decision.
U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland answering a reporter's question at a U.S.-European Union Justice Home Affairs meeting in Stockholm, Sweden. The U.S. Attorney for Delaware he refers to was appointed by former President Donald Trump. And ABC News is reporting that Hunter Biden's plea agreement and pretrial diversion has been assigned to a federal judge who was appointed by former President Donald Trump. This is Washington Today. 2 veto override attempts today in Congress, coming up short of the 2/3 vote needed in the House. It was an override on the veto of a bill that would block the president's college student loan forgiveness plan. And in the Senate, vote on an override of a veto of a bill that would repeal the EPA's stricter emission standards for heavy-duty trucks. Just before the Senate vote, the sponsor of the bill, Deb Fischer, Republican from Nebraska, spoke on the Senate floor.
The EPA's own economic analysis projects that the cost to Americans associated with this new regulation could reach up to $55 billion from 2027 to 2045. And that's because when you force truckers to purchase new, expensive equipment in the name of climate, you are asking the American people to foot the bill. Any product transported by trucks, whether that's food headed to your local grocery store or something that you bought off Amazon, each one of these products will cost more due to massive inflationary burdens this rule will place on the trucking industry. That means every American consumer will feel the effects of this rule and its price increases. Every agriculture producer and every local business will feel its effects. If you're an ag or energy-heavy state like Texas, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, or Illinois, Nebraska, California, or Montana, your local economy will be especially impacted by these higher freight costs. That's not to mention the 3 million Americans who work as commercial truckers. Many truckers work for mom and pop operations, small businesses that simply don't have the financial resources to handle a spike in costs. Many of these businesses and the good-paying jobs that they support, they won't survive this rule.
Senator Deb Fischer, Republican from Nebraska, on the Senate floor. The Senate went on to vote 50-50 not to override President Biden's veto of her bill that would have overturned the EPA rule on heavy truck emissions. It was a party line vote in the Senate, except Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, voted yes. When President Biden vetoed this bill a week ago, he tweeted, "I vetoed a Republican resolution to repeal an EPA standard that will make our air cleaner and prevent thousands of premature deaths by limiting hazardous heavy-duty vehicle pollution. This would take us backwards in our fight against air pollution, so I'm blocking it. Back to the House and the veto override attempt on the president's college student loan forgiveness plan. It was a bill that would overturn that plan. Here is Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, Republican from North Carolina, chair of the Education and Labor Committee.
Mr. Speaker, President Biden's radical plan to cancel up to $20,000 in student debt via executive fiat is utter hogwash. The American people are not fooled by the deceptive, doctored-up talking points on student loans that the left has attempted to force-feed them over the past 2 years. Appealing words like forgiveness have been cast around innumerable times as if to imply that a massive student loan bailout is the equivalent of a sweepstakes giveaway. Here's a reality check for our colleagues across the aisle. There's no such thing as forgiveness. This entire scheme is nothing more than a transfer of wealth from those who willingly took on debt to those who did not or had the grit to pay off their loans. 2/3 of this debt transfer plan would go to the top half of earners. It takes from those in the lower half of earners and gives to the upper half. It redistributes wealth, but from the bottom of our socioeconomic ladder to the top.
Congresswoman Virginia Foxx of North Carolina, the chair of the Education and Workforce Committee, a Republican, on the House floor, and opposing this bill, and that is supporting the veto, the ranking Democrat on the committee, Bobby Scott of Virginia.
Mr. Speaker, 43 million Americans are eligible for President Biden's student loan relief. That's about 100,000 people on average in each of our districts. Nearly 26 million borrowers in congressional districts all over the country have already applied for relief, including 16 million who had already been approved for relief prior to litigation stopping the process. H.J. Res. 45 seeks to deny these borrowers the relief that they were promised. To be clear, the people who would be impacted are not the wealthy and well-connected. 90% of the relief would go to borrowers earning less than $75,000 a year, and you're not even eligible if you're making more than $125,000. That's in stark contrast to the Trump tax scam, where 80% of the benefits went to the top 1% in corporations. Top 1%, that's about $500,000. Moreover, my Republican colleagues refuse to acknowledge the serious questions that have been raised about how the resolution would actually be implemented. Because under the Congressional Review Act resolution, you don't pick and choose which parts of the rule you're overturning. You have to overturn the whole rule, including the pause in student payments and the deferral of interest.
Congressman Bobby Scott, Democrat from Virginia, on the House floor, debate on a veto override attempt of a bill that would reverse President Biden's student loan forgiveness plan. As we head to air with Washington today, the final vote has not taken place, but it is expected that the veto will not be overturned. It will fall short of the 2/3 vote required by the U.S. Constitution to override a veto. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell telling the House Financial Services Committee today that while inflation has fallen from the peak last summer, he said, quote, "We're very far from our inflation target. We're very focused on getting back to 2%. The committee chair, Patrick McHenry, Republican from North Carolina, asked Chair Powell about the Federal Reserve's decision to pause interest rate increases at its meeting last week.
Chairman Powell, as I laid out in my opening statement, inflation continues to be broad-based and persistent, both of which are concerning. Last week, the Federal Open Markets Committee decided to pause rate increases. And at the same time, the committee alluded that it would raise rates more later in the year. And so how should the FOMC's posture at the June meeting be interpreted? Will the committee continue to raise rates later this year? What's the thinking of this? What are we to understand?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So
You're right, of course. We did decide to maintain the federal funds rate at its current rate at this meeting. At the same time, participants submitted personal forecasts suggesting that almost all of them thought there would be additional hikes. And I just want to say those two things are entirely consistent. The point being that the level to which we raise rates is actually a separate question of the speed with which we move. Earlier in the process, speed was very important. It's not very important now. The sense of the summary of economic projections and the decision really is just that, given how far we've come, it may make sense to move rates higher, but to do so at a more moderate pace. That's really it. You know, we were at 75 basis points for several meetings, then we were at 50 basis points, then 50 basis points, 25 basis points at 3 consecutive meetings, and now we're moderating that pace, much as you might do if you were to be driving 75 miles an hour on the highway, then 50 miles an hour on a local highway, and then as you get closer to your destination, as you try to find that destination, you slow down even further.
The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, questioned by Congressman Patrick McHenry, Republican from North Carolina, chair of the Financial Services Committee. Chair Powell reiterated today what he said at his news conference last week. He expects 2 more interest rate increases this year. He also told the committee reducing inflation is likely to require a period of below-trend growth and some softening of labor market conditions, which Associated Press translates to would include rising layoffs and a higher unemployment rate. On Wall Street today, the Dow down 102, NASDAQ down 165, S&P down 23. Washington today continues in a moment.
When citizens are truly informed, our republic thrives. Get informed straight from the source on C-SPAN. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. From the nation's capital to wherever you are. Because the opinion that matters the most is your own. This is what democracy looks like. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. A few more headlines. AP writes that calling for rapid growth of artificial intelligence tools a moment of revolution. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said Wednesday that the government must act quickly to regulate companies that are developing it. The New York Democrat said he is working on what he calls exceedingly ambitious bipartisan legislation to maximize the technology's benefits and mitigate significant risks. And from the Hill, the Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said that Senate Democrats don't have any jurisdiction over the Supreme Court's ethics and should stay out of the court's business, after ProPublica reported that conservative Justice Samuel Alito accepted a luxury fishing vacation from wealthy benefactors. Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Dick Durbin and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, the chair of a key judiciary subcommittee, said in response to the report that they will mark up Supreme Court ethics legislation. That from the Hill. Well, the Senate Judiciary Committee today holding a hearing that was officially described by the Democratic majority to celebrate historic progress made in protecting the rights of LGBTQ+ Americans and serve as a call to remain steadfast in defending these rights against a tidal wave of anti-LGBTQ+ legislation being introduced across the country, particularly targeting transgender youth. One of the witnesses was Harley Walker, a transgender girl teenager from Alabama who has become an activist for trans rights.
I want you to understand that discrimination makes me unsafe. This journey isn't easy. As I first began my transition, there was an incredible amount of bullying in my middle school. So much so that my parents decided I needed to go to online school, not because I wanted to, but the bullying got so bad it was getting close to violence and the school was doing nothing about it. We worked with the school and I eventually got to go back, but kids shouldn't feel helpless at school against being bullied or discriminated against just because they are different. Leaders in our state and country have the ability to help. However, so many of them have decided to promote that same bullying and discrimination. Despite all this, despite being called a demon, a monster, or other despicable things, I love my life. I love my family, I love my friends, and I am happy. I am asking for you to help us stop certain people from using the transgender community as a political pawn. Please stop attacking our lives for votes or money. These are human rights hanging in the balance. Help us communicate that they are impacting people's lives and our pursuit of happiness. We are just like your kid, just like your neighbor, and you. We also deserve the ability to be happy.
Harley Walker, witness at today's Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on transgender rights. Another witness, Human Rights Campaign President Kelly Robinson, was questioned by Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, about transgender women competing in women's sports.
Ms. Robinson, do you agree with Ms. Gaines that there's a difference between women and men?
If the question is about trans women,
I'm just asking, is there a difference between women and men?
I mean, what I can say here is that the NCAA has rules in place. They've had rules in place for the last decade, and when this competition happened,
I'm going to try again.
The rules were clear.
Do you believe there's a difference between women and men? It's a yes/no question. Do you believe there's a difference?
Oh, I think that we're talking about this case with the NCAA.
No, I'm asking a question. Do you believe there's a difference between women and men? Most people could answer this very simply. I'm curious if you're willing to do so.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just putting it into the context of the conversation that we're having. I think that there are definitions related to sex.
Is that a yes? So I'm trying to get a yes or no. I'm not trying to get a speech. Is there a difference between women and men?
I think that there are definitions for biological sex.
Okay, so you're not answering that. Let me ask you this question then. Why do women's sports exist? If you can't define a difference between women and men, why not abolish women's sports and just tell little girls to swim with little boys and see who wins?
Oh, I'm simply saying that that sex is different than gender. And I do believe that women's sports have a great value. I mean, Senator, I'll tell you right now.
Ms. Robinson, please answer the question I'm asking you.
Absolutely.
Why do women's sports exist?
I think that there are so many positive benefits to sports.
But why have a separate category for women? If there's no difference between women and men, why to have women's sports?
I'm saying that there's a difference between sex and gender, and that the NCAA has rules in place, which they have for the last decade.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to enter into the record an article from Duke Law called Comparing Athletic Performances for the Best Elite Women to Boys and Men. And it goes through examining in 2017 the top records for women in the world in various track and field events. So, for example, in the 100-meter, the top record for women in the world was 10.71 seconds. Now, that record for the number one woman in the world in 2017 was, in the year 2017, broken by 124 boys under 18. In that same year, the record for the number one competing woman in the 100-meter dash in the world was broken by a total of 2,474 men. If the radical Democrat agenda to destroy girls' sports and women's sports succeeds, little girls will not have a chance to compete. So I ask unanimous consent that this article be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, with witness Kelly Robinson, president of the Human Rights Campaign, an LGBTQ+ advocacy organization, at today's Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. You can find the full hearing at our video library, cspan.org. Congressional leaders today unveiling a new postage stamp honoring the late Congressman John Lewis, Democrat from Georgia, including Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, and also there the Postmaster General Louis DeJoy. A United States Postal Service press release on the stamp reads that Congressman Lewis spent more than 30 years in Congress steadfastly defending and building on key civil rights gains that he had helped achieve in the 1960s. Even in the face of hatred and violence, as well as some 45 arrests, Congressman Lewis remained resolute in his commitment to what he liked to call good trouble. From today's ceremony in the U.S. Capitol Building Statuary Hall, here's Linda Early Chastang, former Chief of Staff to Congressman Lewis and inaugural President and CEO of the John and Lillian Miles Lewis Foundation.
If John Lewis were with us today, he would first tell you about growing up in Pike County, Alabama, 40 miles outside of a little town called Troy, with parents who had been sharecroppers and who, when John was 4 years old, bought 110 acres of land that his family still owns. And, you guessed it, he would tell you about his preaching to the chickens. And then he would tell you something else you may have heard him say before. That is, the vote is precious. It is almost sacred. It is the most powerful, nonviolent tool we have in a democracy. We must protect it. We must use it. John Lewis's name is almost synonymous with Selma and Bloody Sunday. You know the story. He dedicated his entire life to ensuring the right to vote. His face is the face of voting rights. Having his face on a postage stamp honors Congressman Lewis and encourages voter participation and civic engagement. And on behalf of the John and Lillian Miles Lewis Foundation, I thank all of you who helped to make this postage stamp possible. Now, Congressman Lewis would be too humble to say this. Indeed, he would probably say, "Now, Linda, don't say that. Not now, not here." But I'm going to say it anyway. Honor Congressman Lewis's memory, his life, and his legacy by finding ways to work together, not for us, but for the rest of us. Honor his memory by standing up for what you truly believe is right, and honor his memory by voting.
Linda Early Chastang, former Chief of Staff to the late Congressman John Lewis, at today's ceremony in the U.S. Capitol unveiling a new John Lewis postage stamp. The Postmaster General Louis DeJoy saying that the stamp will be issued in July. John Lewis was a Democrat from Georgia, served in the U.S. House from 1987 until his death in 2020. The stamp has a photograph of John Lewis from a 2013 Time magazine cover when he was 73 years old. And on the margin of the printed stamp sheets will be John Lewis in 1963 attending a workshop on nonviolent protest in Mississippi. You're listening to Washington Today. A Chinese government spokesperson says President Biden's referring to Chinese leader Xi Jinping as a dictator is extremely absurd and irresponsible and an open political provocation, and that China is strongly dissatisfied and firmly opposed to. President Biden said yesterday at a campaign event in California, according to a White House transcript, and was talking about the shoot-down of a Chinese balloon suspected of conducting surveillance of U.S. military sites. He said, and the reason why Xi Jinping got very upset in terms of when I shot that balloon down with 2 boxcars full of spy equipment in it is he didn't know it was there. No, I'm serious. That's what a great embarrassment for dictators when they didn't know what happened. Question about this today to the U.S. State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel.
Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that China called the United States political provocations. How do you respond to this?
The President and the Secretary have been very clear, is that we will continue to responsibly manage this relationship, maintain open lines of communication with the PRC. But that, of course, does not mean we will not be blunt and forthright about our differences. The President, the Secretary, we have been very clear about the areas in which we disagree, including the clear differences we see when it comes to democracies and autocracies. And so we have been very clear that we will not hesitate to stand up for issues and stand up for our values when it's in our interest.
State Department Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel at his press conference at the State Department in Washington. China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson saying again today that China contends that balloon was a weather balloon that had drifted off course. First Lady Jill Biden is previewing Thursday night's state dinner at the White House for the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi. Joining the White House executive chef and White House executive pastry chef will be Nina Curtis, a plant-based chef from California. The Prime Minister from India is a vegetarian. Here's the First Lady today at the White House.
With this official state visit, we are bringing together the world's oldest and the world's largest democracies. After years of strengthening ties, the U.S.-India partnership is deep and expansive as we jointly tackle global challenges. But our relationship isn't only about governments. We're celebrating the families and friendships that span the globe, those who feel the bonds of home in both of our countries. As some of you may know, Prime Minister Modi is a vegetarian. So we asked Chef Nina Curtis, a plant-based pioneer, to work with our White House chefs and create a stunning vegetarian menu. Guests will have the option to add fish to the main course as well, if they choose. Tomorrow night, guests will walk across the South Lawn into a pavilion draped in rich greens with saffron-colored flowers at every table, the colors of the Indian flag. And on the transparent sides, These colors and the strength of the heritage they represent frame the iconic scenery and symbols of our nation, our democracy, and our history. The White House and the Washington Monument. Inside each table arrangement is warm and unique. We hope guests feel as if someone has set that table just for them, because we have.
First Lady Jill Biden today at the White House, previewing tomorrow night's state dinner with the visiting Prime Minister of India. C-SPAN Television will have the guest arrivals at that dinner. You can watch it on C-SPAN TV, follow it at cspan.org or on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. And also on Thursday, the Prime Minister of India expected to address a joint meeting of Congress and hold a joint news conference with President Biden. We'll have coverage of that as well on the C-SPAN networks. By the way, the entertainment for the state dinner tomorrow night will include Grammy Award-winning violinist Joshua Bell and Pen Masala, a South Asian a cappella group from the University of Pennsylvania. This is the third state dinner of the Biden administration. The first was for the French President Emmanuel Macron back in December, and then the second was for the South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol in April. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories that Washington is talking about emailed to you every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.